One of the biggest questions of our time, how can we raise children who flourish in love for all humanity without exception? You go to Belfast, Ireland, and researchers report that Catholic and Protestant children hate each other by age 4. You go to the Middle East, same thing. Jewish and Muslim children hating each other by age 4. We're teaching hatred and we're passing it down from generation to generation. You know, bringing a child into the world isn't a simple thing biologically. I acknowledge that mothers go through a great deal. But in a certain sense, it's relatively easy. Compared to raising a child who doesn't just care for the near and dear, the people who share his or her beliefs, the people in his or her class, the people who look like him or her, speak like him or her, but who has some sense of a common human dignity, a shared humanity. There's a very young Nobel Prize peace winner named Malala, who's quite famous, and many people are highly impressed by what she's done. Just a young kid, shot for going to school. But she is resilient, and she makes her way through all of this tragedy to become an icon of love for all humanity. So how do we get there? Some researchers have pointed out that styles of parenting make a difference. When your kid does something that's a little questionable, don't just scream and yell at him or her. I have 2 kids, they're grown up now. But actually engage them at the level of the golden rule. Studies show that if you ask your child about whether or not their action was consistent with the idea of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, it engages that child's moral imagination, their creativity, and it predicts actually their likelihood of being rescuers. For example, a wonderful researcher named Samuel Oliner was rescued during the Holocaust in Germany. He came from a Jewish family. His biological family was wiped out. So after the war, he studied sociology, and then he went back to Germany, and he asked the rescuers how they were raised. Well, their parents raised them not permissively, not in a heavy browbeating authoritarian way, but in an authoritative way. They asked them, their kids, about the golden rule. They modeled that behavior. They took their children with them when they volunteered to help the homeless, to help the poor, to help refugees. They took their kids with them. So they set up a role model for their children that was very important. And so the whole question of how we can raise caring children, because let's be honest, a lot of children get caught up in these very desperate detours. They're attracted to extremism, to hatred, to violence. They like to think that their own little group, especially in their teenage years, is everything, and whoever is outside their group doesn't matter. There's a lot of teenage bullying, even online bullying. You know, we have clinical situations which are really amazing. I was talking to some of the medical students about a month ago who were doing their psychiatry rotation. They were in the psychiatric unit for the first time, interacting with psychiatric patients. And in 1 week, there were 3 13-year-old girls who had tried to kill themselves because they had been cyber-bullied, right? Something had been unleashed about them on the World Wide Web, and they couldn't deal with it. And there was one girl who was an excellent student in school, an A student. She was a top athlete. And the psychiatrist and the students said to her, well, can you think about yourself in terms of these groups, these athletes and the other students who adore you and love you, and just kind of put this bullying group on the side. You don't have to interact with them. It was still very difficult for her. And so there's a tendency to separate them from us, to dehumanize, to depersonalize. I remember my own daughter as a kid growing up. I sometimes wondered about how her close group of friends would really say harsh things about outsiders. But every kid is like that, every teenager. So it's one thing to love people who are like you, but how about loving all humanity? It's a 21-year-old boy this summer in Charleston, South Carolina. He loved white folks, but he went into an African-American Methodist Episcopal church, and he shot up some of the most spiritual people in America, African-American people, good, wonderful, spiritual people, and he killed them, So he could love people who were like him, and that's a big problem in the world. People love a small fragment of humanity, but they don't love all humanity. And actually that can be a very dangerous thing, and that's the big problem we confront going forward in the human future. Can we raise children? Can we learn how to raise children? Can we practice? Can we figure out how to do it? Children who have love for all humanity, not just some little bit of humanity, but all of humanity. That's one of the greatest challenges of our time, because if we don't solve this problem, we don't have a future. So this question of how to raise a child who loves all humanity, it's so difficult. We have a program here at Stony Brook called Fast Friends. It was developed by a psychologist named Arthur Aaron, who's world famous. People come into the university, they're 17, 18 years old, and they're matched in their first week with someone from a very different background, different class, different religion, different race, different ethnicity, someone who's very different than they are, maybe someone who speaks a different language, as a first language anyway. And they interact, they become partners. And what Arthur has found is that if you can connect with a friendship that crosses all these boundaries between them and us, all these boundaries between in-groups and out-groups, then it helps you to have a love and a regard and a respect for those entire peoples who are just a little different than you are. I married a Japanese woman who's from Kyoto. I remember when I first mentioned to my father, who was a New Yorker, that I was marrying Mitsuko, and he looked at me and he said, "Stephen, wouldn't you really rather marry Wendy?" A red-haired Anglo-American girl. And I didn't get upset, I just kind of quietly walked away. But my dad had been in World War II. He won the Navy medal. He was a lieutenant commander in the Sea of Japan. And he was at Okinawa. Japanese airplanes had dive-bombed over his ship. So he had a certain kind of sense, and it was understandable, about the Japanese people. But I think that by my marrying Mitsuko, and of course having children who were Western as well as Japanese, it helped my mom and my dad, who are now deceased, to come around and to really themselves grow toward a shared or a common humanity. So that's something that that was an experiment in my life, and somewhat of a purposeful experimentation, because frankly, Wendy was pretty nice.